Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. A few days ago, I put out a video talking about the new crowd-funded comics and how that's the new place where I think collectors should go to find comics that are collector's items. And I talked for a while about it, about half an hour, and I didn't even cover about a third of what I wanted to talk about. But I think I'll put out a couple of short videos. This should be hopefully the first of a couple of short videos about these crowdfunded comics because I wanted to touch a little more on some of the smaller crowdfunded comics. And I want to talk today a little bit about Jungle Comics, which is a comic that is written by Chuck Dixon and Kelsey Shannon, which is in development now. It's on Indiegogo right now. It only has about 15 days left. That's why I picked this one to talk about first, because it has the least amount of time of the ones that I'm looking at right now. So this is a little bit odd. It's not exactly what I was describing in my last video. It's a little different, but it has a lot of earmarks about something that may take off. It may not. It certainly has an uphill battle, but it's written by Chuck Dixon, and Chuck Dixon has a long history in comics. He created Bane. Most people remember him being the writer for The Punisher and Batman. I remember him more for things like Alien Legion, the second volume of Alien Legion. I did a video about the first volume of Alien Legion. Haven't gotten around to do the second yet. And he did a bunch of Conan, and I love Conan. And anybody who can write Conan should be able to write a good jungle adventure story. But he has a long list of good comics under his belt, and he's just a good writer, and he's been a good writer for a long time. And on the art side of it, there is Kelsey Shannon, and Kelsey Shannon should be known mostly for X-Men and Justice League, but I think pretty soon he will be known as the guy who did Jawbreakers, it's the second book of Jawbreakers, not Jawbreakers Lost Souls, but I think it's the second book of Jawbreakers, God King. And his stuff is really good. I really enjoy his stuff. It looks very old style, and this whole comic looks very old style, and I like that. I like that about it. I was lucky enough to grow up in a house where there were already comics there when I was a kid, before I even knew how to read. And I remember reading things when I was a little kid, beat up old comics like GI Combat and what else? Turok. And I'm not talking about, Valiant's Turok, or the Turok that came out after the video game in the 90s. I'm talking about Gold Key Turok. These kind of comics where you got your heroes in there. It's a really bare bones kind of old 50s style storytelling. They're in the jungle. They're trying to survive. And I think GI Combat has elements of that, and especially in the art. And I loved those when I was growing up. They didn't impact me as they would have grown up, but they still had some attraction to them. I don't know what it was, if it was just the simplicity of it or not. But this is what Jungle Comics looks like, and this is kind of why they're doing Jungle Comics. They want to not to be so much a throwback to the old Jungle Comics of, we'll say, even the 40s and 50s. But when they're talking about writing the story, they say they're going to take Jungle Comics and turn it on its head. Now, they're not giving a whole lot of information of what Chuck Dixon is planning to do with this, but it's supposed to be not so much as an homage, but almost like a reboot of jungle-style comics. And the reason why they're doing this is they're doing it with Antarctic Press. And Antarctic Press is trying to create a universe for itself. What it's doing is it is taking a lot of old characters from old comics that are now in the public domain, and to use them in their own universe, in a combined universe of Antarctic Press. And that's a big job. And hopefully Antarctic Press can live up to that, because that is a huge job to do. And everybody knows by now, probably that's listening to my videos anyways, the reason why you remember the name of Antarctic Press. If they really want to commit to this, if they really want to have a universe of their own and put these things out there, they need to put on their big boy pants and stop bending the knee to people and, start competing. And that's where I start to get into this little bit of review of Jungle Comics, and it's not all going to be positive. Now, I'm looking at the art for Jungle Comics, and it looks great. But they're giving me very little to see here for the art, and they're giving me even less for the story. They're not even telling you what characters are going to be in it. They are telling you that they're going to be characters from that are in the public domain, old Jungle comic characters, but I can't find anything where they're telling you what the characters are. I'm not seeing anything that tells you really what the story is about. It gives you general outlines of the story, but there is very, very little here to draw you in. There's a couple of good splash pages of art and, the name of Chuck Dixon at the top to draw people in. Chuck Dixon, it drew me in, but I think that Antarctic Press needs to start advertising better. I really think they do. Maybe they feel like they're going to step on other people's toes if they start advertising better or bring the wrath of people down upon them. I don't know. It seems to be their way to try to stay off in the corner and not be noticed. But if you're trying to start a comic line, you can't do it that way. It's just, you can't. I was a researcher, and I have a little bit of research skill. I did research in the public sector, and as a business. I did it at the university level. So I only did a quick search for Jungle Comics to try to get a little bit more information on it, to see what the story is about, to see more art. And, I have a little bit more experience than the normal person just Googling something. But I could not find very much. And even if I'm going to the pages, the Twitter page, or even the main pages of things like Antarctic, they're not pushing this very much. Their goal for the Indiegogo is they want to hit $5,000. They've only hit 3,536 as of this video, and they have 15 days left. But they're not pushing it. They're really not pushing it. I think that this is a great idea. I think that they could do a lot with this idea, but so many people have failed with this idea in the past. And I'm thinking of Valiant, because when Valiant first came out, I wanted to read Magnus, Robot Fighter, and I wanted to read Solar, Man of the Atom. These old characters, they looked great, and they just dropped the ball. They really, really did drop the ball. I stuck with them for a while, but they really didn't get any better. Valiant, unfortunately, if you want to look at the history of where SJW, My Diversity kind of comics came from, look at the old Valiant ones. I read through a couple of them a couple of weeks ago thinking I might do a video on them, and I just set them down and said, no, I'm not touching that again. And it was bad enough the first time, but now that I understand where these things are coming from, it's even worse. So a lot of people have tried to revamp these old kind of stories. And the problem with that is that nobody remembers, really. There's not a whole lot of comic buyers left out there that's going to remember these. They'll just remember having seen them somewhere, in a comic price guide or something like that, or maybe on somebody's wall. But they're nearly not going to remember these characters. And even if they are public domain characters, they do have a history, which is great. But that history is not available to most people through their memory, certainly. You can do a quick search and probably find these books online. I think I went through Chuck Dixon's Twitter, and he had a link to a lot of Jungle comics that had been scanned and put online for free. But this is not one of those comics that I was talking about in my last video, where you can see the excitement in these creators. Now, Chuck Dixon, he's a great writer, and he has a lot of different stuff that he has written. So you can expect a good story, and I really like Kelsey Shannon's art, but I don't see that excitement in it, nor do I think that this is a book that is supposed to be a comic that is centered around either of these two individuals. It's only supposed to be for 4 issues. It's supposed to begin this new comic universe, but it's not supposed to be centered around them. If Antarctic Press really wants to make this thing go, they need to A, start advertising much better. B, I don't know why this is supposed to not come out until March of next year, why they're doing it now. It seems to be very, very far away. They should have done it, I think, much more closer to the date. Also, they have a pool of a lot of good artists and a lot of good writers out there who are probably sick and tired of working at Marvel and DC and having to hide, things like who they voted for so they don't get attacked. I mean, there's this great pool of comic artists and comic writers out there that they could snatch up, but they're probably not going to. But that's what they need to do if they want to get this. That was the problem with Valiant Comics. The story wasn't good enough and the art wasn't good enough. One or the other, you would have stuck with it a little more. But they have access to a lot of people, I would say, on the market now that could take this and really run with it and make it a comic line, because they would have to have a lot of different artists and a lot of different writers to make it a universe unto itself, not just a universe that is something that is going to be remembered as a Chuck Dixon book or a Kelsey Shannon book. So I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to back this yet. I probably will, just because I like this kind of art. I like this kind of story. It's something I grew up with, but it's something that I have high hopes for, but low expectations for. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. I hope that it does good. I really do hope that it does good, but I don't know if, there's just so many pits waiting for it out there in the jungle, for it to fall into. And again, I think there is a huge problem with this Indiegogo campaign in the fact that I really can't find a whole lot of information on it. It's not something that's readily available out there. I think that if you're going to do a campaign like this, you're going to have somebody, at the very least, at Antarctic Press. You're going to try to get either Chuck Dixon or Kelsey Shannon or both of them, taking alternate days and just tweeting about it once a day, putting out pictures, not even if they don't want to ruin their book and give away too much and don't want to give away too much of the story, do something like just tweeting out pictures of old Jungle comics that inspired some of the art or some of the story. And, a tweet is only 2 lines. I mean, you can take the time every day to do that. But I'm not seeing these things. They could be out there, but it's not coming up and it's not readily available. So they need to do a much better job at selling these things if they want to make a much better profit, a much better book. And one of the other reasons why I really want to support this is because I think this is the kind of books that people really need to see these days. I think their tagline for the comic is "When men were men and women were women," or "When men were men and when women were hot." I hope they don't go too overboard on that part of the story, because I think that this is the kind of story that, kids should be reading. If it was something like Turok, Son of Stone, that I read when I was a kid, not to put it too much as an adult-themed kind of story, because these where men were men and when women were women is what people need to see, and what young comic readers need to see on the stands. It's just real heroes, real people, real danger, and just the real world, because it's a jungle. I mean, that's the real world as compared to some of the Marvel places where, it's just constantly in space or in another dimension or things like that. So, yeah, I think this is something, at the very least, that everyone should take a look at to see if they wanted to order a copy. I'm going to put the link in the description, of course, so that you can go over to Indiegogo and take a look at it. It's certainly something that interests me, and I really hope that it does well. And I will have another one of these videos with the next campaign, which is going to be ending soon. And hopefully after a while, I'll get ahead of the game and get to the first of campaigns and talk about these new crowdfunded comics. All right. So that's about all I have to say about Jungle Comics. If it interests you at all, check out the link in the description. And if you like this video, if you like any of my videos, please comment or like, share, subscribe, any of those. That would be great. Until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.